Alright, we're live.
Should I wait till someone gets on?
Alright. We're gonna wait a couple seconds just to wait for more people to hop on. I want to put this.
Cool.
Hi, Michelle.
Hey, Michelle.
Awesome.
Got more people.
Got a couple more people coming in.
Cool.
I'm gonna wave at everyone.
Yeah, do that.
A virtual and a physical wave to all to everyone that just joined.
We trying to just a little bit.
Okay, cool.
Ready to start?
Yes. So the time is 6:02. We're gonna go ahead and get started.
Cool. My name is Ethan, and this is...
I'm Brittany.
Cool. We're working with Plead the First. This is the PR campaign that we're working on right now to raise awareness about the First Amendment on college campuses. And we just want to say a big thank you to Middle Tennessee State University for giving us the grant, so we would be able to put this on for you guys. Next, we're going to go ahead and introduce Dr. Gleason. He is an assistant political science professor at Texas A&M Corpus Christi. And he is a First Amendment expert. So we're going to go ahead and add him onto here, and then we'll be able to kind of get started. Just 1 second. Cool.
That scared me. Alright, I think we're connecting. Awesome.
Hey, Dr. Gleason.
Hey, how you doing?
Doing well. How are you doing?
Doing all right.
Cool, for sure. Well, we just wanted to kind of get started. Basically, if you just want to give us a quick overview about the First Amendment really quick while I pull up some questions. If that's cool.
Sure thing. Yeah. So the First Amendment is the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, ratified in 1791. And what it does is it restricts the government from passing laws or taking actions that impede upon your right to free speech. So the government can't punish you for saying something they don't like. Your right to religion, both in the sense of establishment, we can't make the Church of Texas, and in the aspect of free exercise. So, Ethan, I see you have some kind of necklace around your neck. Let's say that were a cross, and the state were to say, you can't wear that. They can't do that. The right of free press. So the government can't say, for instance, this particular newspaper, this particular news network is making us angry, therefore they'll no longer be able to publish. Your right to petition, you're allowed to ask the government to do things. And your right to assembly. So if people want to get together for the purpose of X, Y, or Z reason, the government cannot stop them from doing that. Now, really important, none of these are absolute. You can, criticize the government, but you cannot yell bomb at the airport.
Mm-hmm. Got you. Okay, cool. Well, thank you so much for that kind of brief introduction into our topic. So for those of you guys that are just joining in, we asked you to send in some questions for Dr. Gleason, or just to kind of share a story that you may have. So the first one is from @Megan_of the and she asks, how does the First Amendment play into COVID-19 stay-at-home protests and protests by churches to hold services? Do protesters have a leg to stand on? How have courts and governments handled this?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. So the like I said, the freedoms in the First Amendment are not absolute. I'll start with the religion ones just because the theoretical framework works a little bit better from the religion perspective. Okay. So the states retain something called the police power. And you think the police power, you're probably, thinking, like the police pulling you over for speeding or what have you. But what the police power really means is to do things in the public interest. So hypothetically, let's say Texas wanted to raise the speed limit to 90 miles an hour. And people were to say, Texas, why are you raising the speed limit? Like, well, people can get where they're going faster and they'll be happy. Good enough, right? The police power is also the ability to do things in the interest of public health. So, for instance, it wouldn't surprise me if 10 years from now, if a kid's going to start kindergarten, they have to have a COVID-19 vaccine. Why? To prevent another viral outbreak. Now, you are allowed to restrict. Speech. You are allowed to restrict religious exercise. If you have what we call a compelling government interest. So if the government's reason is we don't like religion X, okay, that's a problem. That's not going to work. If their reason is we want to prevent a viral outbreak that could be fatal, that's a valid reason. Importantly, that reason has nothing to do with restricting religion. It has everything, that the religion is an incidental aspect of it. And that must also be done in the narrowest way possible. So let's say the religion order had said no church services during COVID-19 and no live streaming of your services either. That wouldn't have flown. But if you were to say you can't get together physically during this pandemic, but if you'd like to do it in other ways, then from a constitutional perspective, it's fine. And states are, of course, free to go less restrictive, like Texas has, for instance, where Texas has deemed religious services to be essential. With respect to speech, in terms of petition for redress of grievances and things, if these protesters would like to express their views that they think the lockdown should end, they're absolutely free to do so. Could the police break up those protests for being assemblies of more than 10 or 15 or whatever the local ordinance says number of people? They could. But granted, though, that would be the same if it was a group of people getting together to talk about how much they like cats, or to talk about how much they're a fan of a particular TV show as well as that protest.
Okay.
So yeah. So do they have they're absolutely free to engage in it, but the government's also free to shut down the assembly in the interest of public health.
Got you. So it's kind of like a give and take, like sort of situation, like a sort of parameters that need to be set. Okay.
Yeah, and it's provided if the purpose of, say, shutting them down was because they don't want to hear that, or because they just have what the legal scholars would call animus towards religion, just well, we don't like religion, then it's a problem. But if it's hey, viruses are a bad thing, we need to cut this down, the state can use its police power to do that.
Got you.
Mm-hmm.
The next question we have is from @Yesenia.matos. They ask, as a college student, if we feel our rights are being restricted by those individuals who come onto campus and scream at other students about going to hell and stuff, can teachers and or staff tell them to leave, or are they protected under the First Amendment?
They are protected under the First Amendment. There's an author, his name's Tom Clancy. He's famous for those Jack Ryan novels and movies, like the Hunt for Red October, Patriot Games, Executive Orders kind of stuff. Rainbow Six, if you've ever played that computer game. Yeah. And Tom Clancy wrote in one of his books, and I'm going to use a bad word, I apologize. There's a constitutional right to be an ass. And now, if somebody is saying something disagreeable, it's what legal scholars would call the marketplace of ideas. Everyone is free to express their opinions, even if others find them distasteful or disagreeable. Now, if someone were to get that, to say, let's say they were doing this on campus and they were, blocking the spine, so you could not walk from class to class. Okay, you could remove them then, not for what they're saying, or for what they're saying being disagreeable, but for impeding the flow of traffic. Or if, say, for instance, I were having class and they came in and just interrupted class, then we could get them out of there. That's what we call a time, place, manner restriction. So you can restrict the times where people are allowed to speak. So I can knock on your door to, tell you about why I like candidate X for president. I can't knock on your door at 3 o'clock in the morning for any reason. Yeah, and then place and manner as well. So like, maybe if I've got like a giant bullhorn and I'm standing at the senior center, they can restrict that. But they could restrict me even if what I was saying was like making grandma really happy. Mm-hmm.
Got you. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The next question we have is from @VVVL Rose, and they ask, can the government restrict ideas or speech considered hurtful even before they are expressed?
No.
Okay.
No. We can. A lot of times this hinges on the question of what we call offensive speech, and I think the classic offensive speech court case is probably Snyder versus Phelps. And Snyder dealt with the Westboro Baptist Church protesting at a soldier's funeral. And Chief Justice Roberts ruled in favor of the Westboro Baptist Church. And he said, words are powerful. They can lift us up to very high levels. They can also hurt us a lot. But the proper response to speech we find disagreeable, according to the Chief Justice, is not to ban it. The proper response is to say, Westboro Baptist Church, I think you're wrong, and let me count off the reasons. The court would use a similar logic like 20, 30 years earlier in the flag burning case. It is constitutionally protected to burn an American flag, even though it offends a lot of people. So you can say whatever you want, you just might not have a lot of friends when you're done.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
The next one we have is from @Nicole.killer.skiller, and their question is, how do you define the difference between hate speech and free speech, and where is the line drawn between the two?
So hate speech is a really amorphous and really kind of constitutionally vague area of speech. Hate speech in itself is protected. If someone wants to say, say for instance that they think, race X is inferior to race Y, or all people of religious view Z are going to hell, that is absolutely protected speech. What the government can do is, if hate motivates an act, then it can be kind of used as an enhancement in terms of like a criminal punishment. So, classic case of this is Wisconsin v. Mitchell. This happened in Wisconsin, and Wisconsin had a law that said if you commit a crime and you're motivated by hate, they can enhance the sentence. So Mitchell beat someone within an inch of his life, which assault is a crime, and Wisconsin, it carried like a 15-year penalty or something like that. But he was motivated by racial hatred. So Wisconsin was able to enhance his penalty to make it 30 years. But if Mitchell were just kind of, hanging out at the bar and saying, yeah, I don't like people of race X, the people sitting around him might be like, wow, dude, I really don't want to talk to you anymore, but couldn't punish him for that.
Gotcha. Okay. The next one is from @HaleyBuck979, and they ask, are there any laws set in place that are allowed to restrict people's First Amendment rights if they involve hate speech or infringe upon others' right to protest against other groups?
So let me see if I'm following that one correctly. So it's like, are there things we could use to kind of like prevent people from protesting when it might like harm? It might kind of like infringe on other person's right to protest.
I think so. The way I kind of interpreted it was basically at what point does my right to, or my exercising of the First Amendment right, infringe on somebody else's? That's kind of the way I took it.
Oh, okay. Well, I think from a strictly First Amendment point of view, that point would never come. But now, if let's say, for instance, you're holding a protest and I don't like what you're saying, and let's say you have like a megaphone or something, and I come along and I grab the megaphone away from you and I push you out of the way and I take the megaphone. but at that point, the crime is actually assault and theft of your megaphone. So it comes to the point when there's a action that would otherwise be criminal that enters into the equation.
Got you.
But
Okay.
if you're protesting and you're shouting and I want to try to shout louder, that's totally protected.
Got you. So not necessarily one versus the other, but more of it'd be a different
Yeah.
kind of infringement. Got you. Cool. Next one is from at Jasmine215. And they ask, why are racists allowed to create images which convey threatening messages? For example, hanging dolls from nooses which resemble people.
Yeah, and this kind of goes back to that idea of hate speech being actually constitutionally protected. When you think about the First Amendment, the First Amendment's designed to protect minority views. The majority doesn't need the First Amendment protection because if it came up in the legislature, a question of like, hey, can majority group express their views? Well, you got a majority of those folks in the legislature. Of course, they're going to say yes. And sometimes, like I said, there is that constitutional right to be an ass. It's one of those things where when you're dealing with the First Amendment, when you look at like these classic First Amendment cases, most of the people that are bringing the lawsuits, people like Fred Phelps, the pastor of Westboro Baptist Church, or Gregory Johnson, who's the dude who was burning an American flag. They're mostly very disagreeable people. But yeah, it's there to protect minority views and what we call the marketplace of ideas. The marketplace of ideas is I could come on here and say like I don't think the Texas Rangers are a very good baseball team, and someone might say, well, that's BS, and engage me in a conversation and potentially change my mind. It's telling about American society that things like images of hateful racist images are generally considered to be marginal because the marketplace of ideas has placed them there. But those folks who believe those kinds of vile things still have that constitutional right to believe it and say it.
Got you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So this next one is a little bit longer than the rest have been. So kind of just bear with me at this one. This one is from at engineer_princess. And they ask, I guess it's really a story first and then a question. One semester I had a tenured professor with a strict no phone policy. At this time, I was going through a medical crisis and was talking to doctors and receiving test results and scheduling appointments over the phone every day. One morning, I received a phone call on vibrate and stepped out of class to speak to my physician. This professor followed me outside and told me not to come back to the class for the rest of the day. So the question then follows, can a professor with tenure have such an overreach that they can interfere with medical issues? Were my rights violated?
Mm-hmm. Well, this, I think, is actually, okay, first disclaimer, I am not a lawyer. So I cannot give legal advice. None of this should be construed as legal advice. So that's just the standard disclaimer. That's probably more covered under the Civil Rights Acts, which, Title I, Title II, Title III. We've all heard of Title IX. With it, those are elements of the Civil Rights Act. Some of them do concern with medical privacy. You can place on a university campus. Professors do have a lot to say over how their classrooms are conducted. Like I don't ban phones because I know it's a losing battle and I'm never going to win it. So I don't care. I don't care about phones. I ask people to be discreet with them. Other professors have different policies. Something like that, that is probably something that's probably best addressed towards the department chair or the dean of that department. And as a member of the faculty at A&M Corpus, I'm so sorry that happened to you. That's a really, really horrible thing.
moving on, at underscore Tenise underscore asks, have you had a personal experience with your First Amendment rights that kickstarted your passion to find out more about it?
Oh, that's a great question. I do have one. So this one has to do with the press clause. So when I was in high school, I wrote for the school newspaper, and I wrote a review of a play. And I wrote the review a little bit different. I embedded myself backstage during rehearsals with the cast, and I wrote the review from the perspective of them and of the cast. And at least in this theater program, the week before the production went live was called Hell Week, because it's like 12 hours of rehearsals a day. I did one day, and man, that was exhausting. And I was just hanging out. I wasn't like trying to memorize lines or anything. And the school newspaper changed it to Heck Week, because hell's a bad word. And I just remember being kind of irked about it. But to me, my passion for the First Amendment, I think, really comes more from, everyone has their. You remember in grade school they would ask you on the first day, what's your favorite color, what's your favorite subject, what's your favorite candy bar? And I was the only one who ever said social studies. I find government fascinating, and when you're dealing with the First Amendment, you're taking those kind of dry, the courts interpret the laws, and you're actually seeing it manifest itself out on a daily basis in ways that impact the ways you and me live our daily lives. And that's where it's passionate for me. But the closest I've ever come is that theater article review from a bajillion years ago.
So then that kind of like stems a question just for me personally. Does that
Sure.
like how I guess, let me word this right. How much of our rights do we give up when we are in, let's say, a high school compared to a college? Like, how much of that is different?
High schools are really unique, and actually, civil rights and liberties is kind of, we're moving beyond the First Amendment. We're moving into Fourth Amendment, which is search and seizure and stuff like that as well. When we start talking about high schools, you do have constitutional rights. They're just not as extensive as they are in the general public. So let's take, for instance, search and seizure. Let's say you're in high school and the principal suspects that you have some kind of banned substance. In my high school, we weren't allowed to have ibuprofen. So Mr. Fritchie thought that I had ibuprofen in my bag. The standard to search my bag in a high school is reasonable suspicion. In the general public, if I'm walking down the street and the police suspect that I have some kind of banned substance in my bag, the standard to search my bag is probable cause. In terms of free speech or religious expression in a high school, they exist provided they are not disruptive. So in a high school, let's say for instance Ethan, go back 4 or 5 years. We're going to make you a freshman in high school, and you're sitting there and you're talking to your friends before class, and you know what? I really like candidate X for president. I think this person would be great at the job. That's fine. Let's say you're about to have an exam, and you're like, oh man, this exam is going to be tough. I'd like to say a quick little prayer. That's fine. But let's say your English professors or English teachers in the middle of a lecture, and you jump up and you stand on top of your desk and you yell, "Person X for president." That's disruptive, and they can send you the principal for that. Mm-hmm.
Interesting. It looks like at engineer underscore princess sent in another question. It says, what is the difference between the two, probable cause and reasonable cause?
Yeah, sure. So we're outside the First Amendment now. We're in the realm of the Fourth Amendment. Reasonable suspicion. I'll give it to you in the terms of they deal in probabilities, right? So there's no drawing a line in the dirt. This is This is the difference between 1 and 2. There's a lot of gray area in between them. Reasonable suspicion would be, where in general public, like let's say you're walking along the street and police officer thinks you might be up to no good, and the police officer says to you, "Hey, what's going on, man? How you doing tonight?" "Okay. Hey, this looks a little bit shady. You got that big bag with you. What's going on?" And just kind of asking you a couple of questions. That's reasonable suspicion. Okay. Probable cause would be the bar that you're probably up to no good, and that you would be able to go in front of a judge and say, based on X, Y, and Z, it seemed reasonable to pat him down, to open up his bag, things of that nature. Probable cause is also the level to get a search warrant. Reasonable suspicion is the ground to pull someone over.
Gotcha. Okay. So slight variance there.
Yeah.
And then it looks like we have 2 more. So
Okay.
This next one is from @Christie1198, and they ask, are there limits to the First Amendment?
Absolutely. The classic line on the First Amendment is that you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. I always tell students, though, that nowadays it's like you can't yell bomb at the airport. So let's say you're in line at the airport security, and let's just say the line is moving just glacially slow, and you say, "Oh my God, this is so slow. TSA is useless." And the TSA agent hears you and goes, "Sir, you just hurt my feelings. You're gonna be coming with me."
Gotcha.
That's totally protected. But if I yell bomb at the airport, and I don't know about you, but if I'm standing in line at the airport and someone yells bomb, I'm running the other direction.
Gotcha.
And that's going to induce a panic. Someone's probably going to fall and get trampled. And now at this point, you've induced a panic, and that is a limit to speech. Religion. You're protected in your free exercise of your religion. The government can't say everyone must have a cheeseburger on Fridays because, Seventh-day Adventists don't eat meat at all, and Catholics don't eat meat on Fridays during Lent. But if your religion says that you have to go around punching people in the face, that the government can restrict you on doing that because assault is still assault.
Gotcha. Okay. And this last one looks like it's from @K_Marie6496. How did freedom of the press come into existence? Are there restrictions on press freedom?
Actually, so when it comes to the every aspect of the First Amendment has limits on it. Nothing is absolute except we call it the freedom of belief, which is kind of implied with speech and religion. So you can believe whatever you want, right? But of all the ones that are actually written down, press is the most protected. And when it comes to press, the big thing is this idea of what we call prior restraint. The government cannot stop the press from publishing something that it finds disagreeable, right? And that really kind of the freedom of the press really kind of came into being the same place that almost everything in the Bill of Rights came from. The practices of the English. The English were, during the late colonial period, kind of the lead up to the American Revolution, they were censoring the press left, right, and center. And blocking publications of things, taking away licenses to print from newspapers that were not friendly to the British government, and the founders saw that as a big problem because if you want to have a free society, they have to know what's going on. So that's where the press's freedoms have come from. And again, within the First Amendment, those are the most powerful, are the protections on the press.
Cool. Well, then going off of that, like if we talk about what is it? It's like libel, right? Is that written?
Yeah.
Okay. So then, how big of an impact does that have on the First Amendment?
Yeah. So it's ridiculously hard to prove libel.
Okay.
And there's two standards. There's a standard for public figures, and then there's a standard for private persons. So let's say hypothetically, I can see all the little things popping up there on the side, and I see something about satire, which I will get on in just a moment there. If someone wanted to criticize me and write like a piece for the for Island Waves about how horrible I was here, and say something like, well, it's obviously clear he got done with this Instagram live thing and he went and he ate puppies. In this instance, I'm acting as a public figure. Would it hurt my feelings? Yeah, it would. Is there anything I can legally do about it? Not really. If it's just like a private person, like let's say hypothetically, someone wrote something about my sister, who's not a public figure in any stretch of the imagination, she could prove libel and recover damages, but it's still extremely difficult to prove libel even for a private person. I'm trying to read sideways here, and it looks like there's a question about satire. Yeah, satire is protected. So, it's like The Daily Show or The Onion, or what's the other one I always see on Facebook? I think it's called like hardtimes.net or something. That's all protected because it's, again, we're dealing with public figures.
Gotcha. Cool. And I think that just about wraps up all of our questions. We went through them, and even some of these little ones on the comments as well. But we did want to say thank you so much again for joining us on this live. I know a very busy man, and for you to kind of come out and help us, we appreciate that a lot. But as we're kind of coming to a close, we're going to go ahead and announce the contest winners. So each of the winners will receive a t-shirt, a decal, and a $25 HEB gift card. And the first one is at Megan_of the sea. The next one is at _Tenise_. The next is at Engineer Princess, followed by Haley Buck 979, and finally Christy 1198. So we just want to say thank you guys again for joining in and kind of tuning in with us. Dr. Leeson, thank you one more time for your time. But yeah, that's all we have for you guys to say.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
It was. Thank you. Have a good day.
Take care now. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Does it say?